and thank you for joining us to yet another Net Talk before the end of this year, 2023. I am very pleased to welcome each and every one of you to today's Net Talk, which is based on the ILO Convention 169. The focus today on this convention is on the indigenous and tribal communities' rights in Tanzania. First of all, I would like to recognize the presence of the following guests that you can see. These are guest speakers who will quite soon engage and tell us more on this topic. We have Senais Nyambo, known here as SJN Slim. He is currently a PhD student on environmental protection and known as a researcher and heritage expert from Tanzania. And then we have Christoph Hahn, an advisor at the Society for Threatened Peoples, specifically an advisor for genocide prevention and responsibility to protection. Then we have Martin Oelz, that is a senior legal specialist at the ILO, the International Labour Organization, dealing a lot with the Convention 169 on the rights of indigenous people. So these are the speakers that we have tonight here. So yeah, it's very good that you're here. Thank you very much. And yeah, we'll give you a virtual applause. You might not see it, but it is there. Now, we did have another speaker, thank you, who was unfortunately not able to join us in today's Net Talk, but we managed to catch him in Berlin and conduct an interview with him. That was last week on his short trip to Germany. I'm speaking of none other than the current winner of the Weimar Human Rights Award of this year, 2023. His name is Joseph Oleshangai. He's a lawyer, an activist for the rights of Maasai, and he was last week here for a visit in Germany. Now, without much further ado, I would like us all to pay attention, to listen to the interview that we conducted with him, and to get into this topic, because it is something that he's been dealing with a lot and is still dealing with it.
Hi everyone, thank you very much for being with us today. Today I'm very honored and happy to be here with Joseph Oleshangai. Joseph is a human rights activist and a lawyer from Tanzania who's been fighting for the rights of the Maasai people. And Joseph, you've been awarded the Human Rights Award by the city of Weimar this year, 2023. Joseph, this award, what does it mean for you and for your cause of the Maasai people?
Okay, thank you very much. And actually, first for having me this morning, which I love to share, you know, what happens and what we have been fighting for. And to respond to your question, the award by the Weimar city on human rights, it means so much to me as a person. Like everything that I do, some people somewhere, whom some I never met before, I have never been in Weimar, and I have been in Germany, of course, for the same things about the Maasai rights. So it tells me the first thing is everything that I do it in the right way. But it also means everyone oppressing our people is doing it wrong. So I should keep saying what I always says because they are wrong. But it also sends a message of solidarity to our people. So it's not Joseph alone, it's not Oleshangai alone. Because it's not me alone also fighting for the Maasai rights. It's a collection of dedicated men and women, you know, community members, very solid. So it also sent a message of solidarity to us. So that's what briefly the word means.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Of course, Joseph, we've already heard and read a lot about the horrible evictions of Maasai people, especially from Ngorongoro area, but they also face a lot of challenges in other places as well. As a lawyer, you represent those people directly, and you speak to the public about the situation of your own community. Can you tell us a little bit about your work?
I am an advocate, yes. Of course, I work with the NGO that dedicates to providing legal aid to people who cannot, get access to courts. And then, in the mid of, that's my daily routine for all the people, not necessarily the Maasai. Then this problem came, which to me I has a very personal responsibility into it. And so the first things, there were eviction, as you said, already in Loliondo, 70,000 people displaced in a day, like tomorrow. We don't want you here, get out. Which to me, I think, of course, is every human responsibility to take some actions, and that it includes me as a person, but more particularly as a person from that community. So what I started doing is trying to speak out, like, this is not right. This is actually what is being done. In time, collecting testimonies of the people affected and put them public, hoping it might even show the government that at least some people are watching. Then the second one is, the land is gone. Many people are, affected in many ways. Their homes were distracted, their livestock seized, they were actually displaced. I and my colleague decided to be going to court. So from June last year, we have 14 cases in different courts. They violate this, we file a case. It's a government. It has many machineries. It never cares, by the way. So they violate, we go to court. So with the problem, for example, that happened in Lyondo last year, they declared a game control area. We went to court, challenging, it never follows the law. And the court said, in September this year, it never follows the law. But in the middle of it, the president declared the same area into a game reserve. We have to go to court again, which the case is actually pending. In Ngorongoro, the place actually that I'm from, government is paralyzing social service, like access to medicine, access to health facilities, education facilities, like crashing everything to force the people. Like they say, okay, we are not shifting you, but we are crumpling every single system, health service and others, hoping it can force everyone to get out. They first come and say the following school be demolished. School, government schools, dispensaries, government dispensaries, and like crashing everything. And they say, no, it is not us forcing. These people are actually fleeing the area because they are so poor. There are disease, they can't get medical service, but it's actually them taking away. And so we said, no, this is not human. So we went to court.
As a lawyer and an activist, you're familiar with the ILO Convention 169. To what extent could a ratification process in Tanzania be helpful for your cause? And do you see any movement in that direction?
First part of the question, it is so helpful if we can ratify, because the ILO Conventions on Indigenous and Tribal people, actually, the problem now we are having in Tanzania, they're saying Maasai are not indigenous, and in many ways they are saying Maasai are not citizen. Ratifying the ILO, then it brings protections, in many ways, because it applies to what we think, not what the government wants us to feel. So it is about the culture, it is about the spirituality, it is about the economy of the people. as against the mainstream, and is the same problem happening with the Maasai in Tanzania. So if Tanzania was to ratify, maybe it will reduce many of the problems that we're having. Is Tanzania likely to do that? Is no. This is very honest. They are too much now against Maasai than any time before of any. We have never seen from the colonial time, Germans, British, then the 5 successive governments, a government that is in war completely with one tribe, the way they are dealing with the Maasai. It's a tribal thing, so they fear that maybe if they ratify, it will bring some backlash into them. So we'll keep pushing, of course, but I don't see them doing.
So very little hope for the moment on that side of the ILO Convention, but we continue to push.
Okay, thank you very much. You might be surprised that there were some stops in the video, but the interview is much longer. This was just some parts that we took out for this net talk. If you are interested in this interview, you can still look at it via YouTube or via Spotify. All this shall be in our newsletter, in the Tanzania Network newsletter and on social media. So the full interview is still available. These were just some parts of it. I would like to start with you, Slim. Slim, coming from Tanzania, being a Maasai yourself, and since we've heard a lot about this, we've heard and read a lot about this eviction of the Maasais from the Ngorongoro District, and Joseph, in his interview, has also talked about it and about the plight, what's been going on from his perspective. Now we would like to hear from you. How do you perceive this situation?
Well, from a heritage perspective, first of all, you know that Ngorongoro is a World Heritage Site. So this is also part of my area because I'm doing also World Heritage. But of course, there are more issues to do with why the conflict with the Maasai, and I think it's more of managerial issues also, because Ngorongoro is one of the biggest tourism destination in Tanzania, as you know, and as years go, the area becomes more, I think, becomes more crowded with tourism activities. But since now there are many businesses like hotels and other economic activities, this is one of the things that also is bringing the conflict. But also, what I don't understand, maybe from the legal perspective, the lawyers like Joseph know better, is one of the reasons that Ngorongoro was inscribed on World Heritage was having the Maasai living in harmony with the animals. Now, because now the lack of expertise, probably, this is just my guess, because it still doesn't make sense to me that the Maasai now are said to be more than they were supposed to be, while there is a management that could have overseen that and watched over the increase. But when we speak of the increase of the Maasai, but not speaking of the staff working in the area, this is another also issue that personally I find it a bit difficult when it comes to this issue. But yes, I still believe there could be a way that the government could sit and talk with the Maasai and come come up with a solution. I still strongly believe, because for me, from the heritage perspective, if you remove the Maasai from the equation, then we are removing one of the universal outstanding value of the area, which makes the site as a World Heritage Site, which would mean delisting the site from the list, which I wouldn't be very happy about, because when the site is on the World Heritage Site, it has higher protection, as now it's not only about the state deciding what to do on the site, but it must consult the international laws, all the laws, like especially the environmental laws and human rights. This is also one of the things that I think the government should be very keen on dealing with this. But also, these are still Tanzanians who have all the rights. I still believe Tanzania is big enough to accommodate us all, but an amicable solution should be sought, and not using too much power just because there is an investment or some other economic activities that would benefit more the government. There must be an amicable solution.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your broad explanation and the heritage point of view. But do you have any, or would you know about the status and the situation of the Maasai themselves who were evicted? And like you said, they should find a better option. What possibilities do you think the Maasai have to enforce their rights?
Well, enforcing the rights is one thing. Having an amicable option is another. For me, the conflict has been going on for a long time. I haven't been to Ngorongoro or the Loliondo so far, so I wouldn't say who was evicted or who wasn't. All I know, for instance, is from the media. And so now there are two sides, the government and the Maasai. Each one is telling their story. The government is saying that the Maasai were given options to have houses built for them and other options for grazing their cattle. But when you go to the ground, to the field itself, the story is different. Now, as an expert or as a commentator, I would say I would have to be on the ground to see exactly what is going on, because there are so many conspiracies going on, and getting the truth sometimes it's a bit hard, because now politics come in, because as the media portrays, it seems that there are some Maasai who accepted the offer from the government, which is yet to be proven. But the Maasai come and they say, no one had accepted that. So this is a conflict. But I think there is a need to look deeper into the case. Is it only the Is it mainly the Maasai that are affecting the area? What about the other businesses that are in the area? But when we come later, we'll look at the cases that were launched by the Maasai, I think, or international activists against the eviction of the Maasai. And you can see the way they handle. I would say, if what is stated in these cases is what really happened, then something is wrong. You cannot go to a village with a loudspeaker and just say people have to go away without giving them option or giving them time and considering their environment. So yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Now I would like to also hear something from Martin Oelz, the senior legal specialist from ILO. Martin, could you tell us briefly about the convention, what it is all about, its objectives, and how that convention is enforceable? How is it enforced? You're still on mute.
Thank you so much for the question and for having pronounced my Austrian name so perfectly from Germany. It's a pleasure to be with you here, and we are really delighted, you know, that the focus is on very specific and concrete issues and the challenges that countries in Africa, including Kenya, are facing. The convention is one of many ILO conventions, but it is a very specific one because it's at the international level, the only international legally binding instrument with regard to indigenous and tribal peoples. It becomes binding on a country. When it's ratified, that means the government and the parliament take a decision to sign up. But having said this, Kenya has already international obligations with regard to indigenous peoples under the framework of the African Charter for Human and People's Rights. And the African Commission that is overseeing the application of that has already made several statements around the situation in Kenya, and also clearly said that the Maasai are an indigenous people that requires and has the protection under international law. So our convention from the International Labour Organization is another instrument. It has different mechanisms for its enforcement in the wide sense. As the United Nations and the ILO is a part of the United Nations, our guidance on these issues cannot be directly enforced by the organization. But the organization has, once a country has ratified, means of advising, recommending, but also proactively supporting the stakeholders in the country to ensure the application of such an instrument. So this is a broader process. Now, I have to say that in Africa, the convention is not yet widely ratified, but the principles that it entails can be very useful because it is an instrument that is for the protection of rights. It clearly ascribes rights to indigenous and tribal peoples and communities that go very broadly from their land rights. So there is protections against displacement without consultation, without actually prior consultation. And in the case of displacement, even the principle is that communities should not be displaced without their consent. And there is only, once the government wants to make an exception from that, there needs to be specific safeguards in place, including the possibility to appeal such a decision in the court, to be compensated, and things of the like. So there is a clear framework. It does not put one community above the other, but the convention provides for a process by which different interests, different points of view can be reconciled through dialogue and strong mechanisms for participation. So the convention calls actually on countries to put in place national processes and mechanisms for dialogue and participation. And so including prior consultation processes. So in that sense, it is very much something that could be a positive element in bridging some of the gaps that are there, including the gaps in dialogue and respect for rights. Now, as an instrument, once it's ratified, it can also enforce through the national courts, because in many countries where it's ratified, the courts can also directly rely on it as a source of law, and that would be another added value for lawyers actually in Kenya to rely on it. In Tanzania, sorry.
Okay. Oh, thank you very much. You've answered also my next questions, but still, you said most African countries have not ratified the convention And we know that most African countries have many indigenous and tribal communities. Why do you think is that so?
Yes, for historic reasons, actually, in African countries, from a foreign policy position, in the position of African countries in the United Nations has been for a long time that the international protections for indigenous peoples do not as such apply to Africa, because the term of indigenous peoples was not well used and well recognized in the African discourse, political, legal discourse, in the sense that indeed that all Africans consider themselves indigenous to Africa, vis-a-vis, let's say, the former colonial powers. And the historic process of nation building, the focus on national unity, was also seen as something that prevented many countries from accepting that some of their communities and peoples actually are somewhat different, are in a subordinate position economically, politically, and would benefit from protection of their specific rights. And hence, this has been, from a political point of view, a long journey, but as of 2007, many African countries have voted in favor of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The African Court on Human and People Rights has given quite extensive guidance that the term of indigenous peoples and the concept of indigenous peoples is sometimes actually that is indigenous to Africa. And so this is a developing a landscape of recognition of communities that that need specific protections, not at all to say that some citizens or some people have more rights than others, but in order to ensure that everyone can enjoy their rights on an equal footing, we need to be also specific about some specific protections. And the rights to land and natural resources is one of that area, because indigenous communities really depend on to a much higher degree on the access to the land that they have traditionally occupied or used. In that sense, it's protecting also communities like the Maasai, which and their particular livelihood and sort of economic models.
Okay, thank you very much on this aspect, also on historical events that is causing people to be, or countries to be, hesitant in this, and political reasons as well. Now, I would like to go over to our next guest here, Christoph Hahn. Christoph, advisor for genocide prevention and responsibility to protection, but also in this aspect of indigenous people. You are familiar with this topic as well. Now, my question to you is based on Germany and the ratification of this convention. So together with other organizations, the Society for Threatened Peoples was involved in the ratification process of the ILO Convention 169 in Germany. Now, Germany has come to ratify the convention in 2021. That is 30 years after the convention came into force. Would you tell us why that is the case?
Yes, thank you, Dorcas, for the introduction. I'm very happy to be here. I think that's a very great question. And I cannot tell you that from my own experience. So I'm very glad to have the experience from one of my former colleagues as well, who took part quite a lot in that. And I think one of the main contributions in that regard was also the coordination group in Germany, who really pushed for the convention throughout time in Germany to get it ratified. And the SDP, the Society for Threatened Peoples, was a founding member. So we were already pushing for quite a long time in that regard as well. There were also some other people involved, very actively involved as well, like the Forum of Human Rights here in Germany. This coordination group really started push for this ratification quite early on. However, given in Germany the situation, as Martin also has emphasized, with Tanzania and the historical dependencies in African countries, in Germany there was often this argument brought forward that in Germany there are actually no indigenous peoples, so which would therefore lack any argument for ratification of the ILO 169 anyways. However, then the coordination group and also indigenous peoples from other countries often brought forward the argument that within the foreign policy and the economic policy, actually, Germany does really interfere quite a lot with indigenous peoples and actually may also violate with indigenous people's rights in that regard too. And so this was brought forward more and more. However, still there were some other counter arguments then, still some of which were really problematic actually in that sense too. For example, Sintitse and Romnia were often called as an argument which was racist, that it would not be financially viable to do that because these would actually or might fall under this indigenous peoples grouping. However, there was actually then a turning point when the coordination group actually asked them about their position and they actually said that they wouldn't even be dependent on the ILO 169 anyways, because the European Declaration for Minority Rights would actually already cover that. And then there were also some other minorities too, which were already covered, like the Danish people in the north of Germany. The minority there where there are the German-Danish agreements which cover that. And then the Sorbs too, which are a minority in the east of Germany, which were also covered under other agreements. So then there was after these arguments, these counter arguments were debunked one after the other. There was still this push, and even in 2012 already there were indigenous peoples emphasizing in political talks that there would be the outermost need for Germany to ratify it, but they were not heard. I think there was then a considerable shift in the 2018s also with the change of government as well. And for example, the German advisor for human rights and humanitarian help, the political representative, was quite supportive in that regard too, to bring that process forward. And then actually in 2021 the ratification came to a successful end actually, but it took a lot of time and a lot of considerate and continuous pushing by the civil society organizations on the one hand, but also a lot of lobbying from indigenous peoples from abroad actually in Germany with these civil society groups too, and to emphasize the responsibility of the Federal Republic of Germany in their foreign and economic policy.
Okay, wow, thank you very much for this elaborate explanation on this indirect involvement of a country, that, yeah, what it can all bring about, and the fights for the ratification until it was successfully done. Yeah, so Germany having ratified this convention, what has it committed to now?
That's actually quite a good question because, the ILO 169, while it is more legally binding, as Martin already emphasized, and it's more legally binding as the UNDRIP in that regard too, that it also needs to be translated into national, legal sources. And there in Germany, it still lacks quite a bit after the ratification. So within Germany now, there is still, after the ratification, a certain need to actually follow suit with some legal implications within Germany, apart from the official broader ones that are part of the official ILO ILO 169 documents, like the Article 24 and 26. So there would also still be a need within Germany actually to follow with some legal implications, especially some specific ones, for example, redress mechanisms, complaints mechanisms and such, which would also be important in the underlying case that was mentioned by Joseph Oelz in the beginning.
Okay. Now back to the indirect involvement of other countries in let's say threatening indigenous people's rights. Germany is providing massive funding for nature conservation in Tanzania through the KfW, the Frankfurt Zoological Society, that is the Frankfurt Zoological Society, and TANAPA, Tanzania National Parks Authority. And according to the latest report by the Society for Threatened Peoples, both are playing a problematic role in the conflict. Does that contradict the fact that Germany has ratified the convention?
Yes, thank you so much. That is actually the case because, as we would emphasize, because as also has been mentioned previously, there is a certain need for asking for consent with indigenous peoples as part of the ILO 169 convention, which in Tanzania there are specific evidence that hints that this was not the case with the evictions of the Maasai. As the report outlines, maybe to fill in some information here, the Frankfurt Zoological Society, as part of other additional stakeholders, actually told in a government report from 2019 that social services should be reduced in Ngorongoro conservation area in order for, and then there are examples given like schools, which the Maasai have been relied on for more than 40 years in this area, in this conservation area, with the specific objective to then reduce the number of Maasai peoples in the Ngorongoro conservation area. So this hints then to an indirect displacement that is to be targeted by these measures, which of course also, as Slim has emphasized previously, the Maasai actually are part of this scheme in the Ngorongoro conservation area as well, also from the heritage point of view. So that way, the Maasai land rights, the ancestral land rights are, well, violated, and they should be asked for consent previously before being relocated and then compensated. In the other region that the Frankfurt Zoological Society is active as well, this is Loliondo, which lies to the north of Ngorongoro. And there in June 2022, there have been violent evictions started. So actually by relying on violence from security guards from the Tanzanian government and other divisions, they have actually beaten and shot on Maasai people there in actually trying to appeasing protests against these relocations. And there are also, until early this year, there is evidence that the FZS was active in or organizing land use plans, which would have then legitimated these relocations, and actually these well, a new declaring this area as this area called Pololeti as a game reserve, there in that case also the problem is that there were still court appeals and court processes ongoing at this point in time when the Frankfurt Zoological Society was actually contributing and organizing these land use plans. So this is also a very problematic ongoing process in that regard, which would have legitimized actually these evictions in the Pololeti area in question.
Wow, thank you very much. Those are really deep insights. But since you have to leave soon, Christoph, I would also invite you now that I do not read any questions in the chat, that you give us a closing remark on this topic of the convention, briefly the importance of ratifying this convention and the dangers of not doing so, and maybe what ways are there negotiations or maybe convincings that can be done to help the indigenous people being able to enforce their rights legally through this convention or any other means?
That's a very good question. I think one of the main remarks would be, especially with the eyes peeled on Germany, that there is a very, very great need to outline more legal implications, because so far since the ratification, the process has been stopping. So there's still a need to also put that into and translate that into national law, actually. There is outermost need to push forward in that regard. And then on the other hand, I think it's also very important to well, especially with the perspective on nature conservation, I think it's very important to consider ILO 169 because of the land rights of indigenous peoples being violated so frequently there. Also with regards to the Kunming Montreal Biodiversity Framework, which well, targets to put 30% of the world's land area under conservation. I think it should be very carefully watched out to not put indigenous peoples under more danger of evicting them. And this is very important. I think on the other hand, ILO 169, because it isn't ratified by so many countries, it might actually show how good of an instrument it is, because some countries might shy away from actually ratifying it because it is legally binding.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, over to you, Slim. What do you think? What are your closing remarks on this aspect of threatening indigenous people's rights, options, dangers?
Yeah, I think the fact that most of the countries, looking at the way things are going, are not ready to ratify the convention, mostly because of the legal binding part, that when the countries ratify the convention, they are bound to ensure that they protect these. They are obliged to follow and comply to this convention. And we all know, and as we can see, most of the countries that haven't ratified the convention are in Africa. From my perspective, I think also international organizations like the ILO should also find a way to talk to the governments with more options, because the reason the countries are not ratifying because of the options they have, economic, politics, but also tourism. Like in Tanzania, mostly it's because of the economic reasons, where the government, because the land in Tanzania is public. We, the citizens, are only leasing we don't own the land. So when they ratify, this means they give if the indigenous people claim to own the land, the government, and the government is obliged to comply to this convention. There are many things that the government will not be able to do. But since it's economic, then probably you would know much better, because I'm talking from a perspective of the UNESCO Convention as well. We have the same problem. Implementation is facing objection because of the binding nature, which restricts the government from using the land on several economic activities. Like for the case of Loliondo, we know that OBC, which is the investor, is trying to acquire this land for hunting, elite hunting. Now, the government, on the other hand, needs the money from the investors. On the other hand, ILO and other international organizations are pushing the government to protect the rights of these the Maasai. These are two conflicting sides, where the government is trying to harness the economic potential of the area, while it's also supposed to comply to the international laws. So I think also this ILO could sit with Tanzania and see if there are better opportunities outside this investment, or other areas that the OBC or other interested investors could invest. And since our focus is on the indigenous rights, then what can we do to make sure that they have a better opportunity to their rights? Like you said, Dorcas, yes, they have a chance to stand in the law, in the courts of law. Like we have the East African Court of Justice, which put injunction from the prohibiting the government from evicting them. But still, the case hasn't even given the ruling date yet. So you can see these are, they stand a chance, but are these chances going to be how possible are they? This is the question. Yes, every citizen have right to open a lawsuit against the government, but to what extent do they stand to win? This is the question. But yeah, there are more also political reasons, and yeah. So my suggestion, or my standpoint would be, if the government is to ratify the convention, what alternatives does Tanzania have to harnessing the potential of these areas, at the same time protect the indigenous people? Because we all know the reason they are not ratifying is because the government is hesitant to the implication once they ratify. And it's not only Tanzania. We see there are many countries that have done so. Like when it comes to UNESCO, for instance, US itself withdrew for economic reasons and for other reasons. So what can these international organizations like ILO and others offer to Tanzania to ensure that they have alternative that they can use and not to evict the Maasai. Why are they evicting the Maasai? Because they want to use the area for other economic purposes. And because the land, the president is the, is that the doctrine of public trust. The land belongs to the public, and the president has the mandate to say what the land should be used for. Yeah. What's the standpoint of ILO and other international organizations, for instance? What can they do to check with this one? If the government is the overseer of the land, how can they ratify? Because in the end, they will have to harness the potential of these areas, but they have no alternatives. German would have more opportunity because you are already developed. The global south, the countries still need to develop. They need investment. They need to use the land for economic purposes. If they don't have that, they will still use it. So if you were to me, I would say the developed countries, the so-called developed countries, should have a better talk with, or see how they can help the developing countries to attain development without endangering the indigenous people.
Thank you, Slim. Yeah. You've raised some very important questions, and I think Martin Oelz would like to respond to them, to those questions. So I will invite him to also give his closing remarks, or start with this.
Great. This is a wonderful opportunity, and I think it's a very frank and I think a realistic discussion, that we are having here. The convention, is actually making the case that protecting rights and ensuring development is not a contradiction. No? And the experience for many countries, particularly Latin America, many of which are developing countries, is actually that the convention, once ratified, serves as a platform of trust between the different parties. No? So that is really a value added here. With regard to and it strengthens the national system of law. It's binding, and that makes the element of trust, once ratified international law, but it does not allow an organization like the ILO to interfere, and to impose it in any way. It's a tool for the countries. And I think we need to, when we promote an international instrument, we need to look at exactly what Slim said, what's in for the national stakeholders. This is not something brought from outside that people need to be aware what they are looking into and what's that in for them to helping to move them forward. No? So I think that in that sense, now in the context of the climate change debate, the big changes that all countries will face, the need to protect nature, biodiversity, and so on, it becomes more and more important to harness the role of indigenous peoples, for this. No? Not only because they will get the UNESCO label withdrawn, when all the people are moved out of the heritage site. No, I mean, that's true. It's another aspect of it, but what's the inherent nature? So, for instance, in Kenya, we have been discussing with government, including at the local, at the county level, and indigenous peoples, the ILO simply as a facilitator to think about a concept that they then call the green local economic zones, which were like livelihoods, for indigenous people, supporting their activities, but making it compatible with other activities and so on. So it's like it became quite a large discussion around actually the model of development that the country wants, and I think that this kind of processes are helpful. In response to the land, it is true that in many countries, the government pretend to own all the law. But it's not that of a monolithic position, because in many countries in Africa, actually, collective land rights of communities or some aspects of them are somewhat recognized either in customary law or other forms of law or by jurisprudence. I'm not sure exactly what the latest is on Kenya on this. So it's not that monolithic, but it's for sure that the convention, once ratified, says, the government needs to protect, recognize and protect existing land rights of indigenous peoples. It's not gonna do really too much to create new land rights, so there will be of course there will be claims and counterclaims about this, and they can be resolved. Also, for instance, Norway is a developing country that has ratified the convention with a view to resolving long-standing issues around land rights. With the ILO and the help of the ILO, they managed to find an agreement. The ILO facilitating about, they declared they created a land trust that is, that is managing collective land rights, including in area where there is mixed populations, for instance. So I think there is different models of dealing with this, and one has to look into it. But clearly speaking, the convention is a challenging and it's actually a revolutionary instrument in quotation marks, because it creates hard facts of law, and it is governments will have to invest. It has been ratified by countries that are today high or medium income countries, like OECD countries in Latin America. And despite there being high medium income countries, not developing countries, poor countries, they have underinvested in the public institutions, and hence it's not fully applied. So this is a call for everyone to make more investments to make their own state institutions more inclusive and bring everybody on board. So we are saying this is human rights, but it's also governance, and it's inclusion and strengthening the social fabric of the nation, and valuing diversity. So we are saying that this is not the silver bullet to all the questions, but it can help. Even if not ratified, I think it has been helping. Some of the approaches are there, but of course, we are, as the ILO, we are now actually coming back to Africa after a number of years that we have been too active in promoting it. So, for instance, we will have an activity next year, a 1-year conference that we will hold at our training center on the convention, and we don't know yet on which countries we are focusing, but it will be basically with Latin America and with Africa to share the experiences between the two regions and to make the convention better known as an instrument. I think I'll stop here. We could, of course, go on, but I'm conscious of the time. Thank you so much.
Wow, thank you very much for your time. For each speaker here, you have showed your expertise, you have shared with us your knowledge and given us a much broader picture on this topic. And you raised also questions that I think are working in many of us. I do not need to repeat them right now, but yeah, thank you so much. And our time is now over, and see you next year for other Net Talks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.